Even if it wasn't. The illegal stuff is in a different place. I keep that under my television in my living room. And we are live. Welcome to the NBA Deeper Dive. It is Tuesday, November 12th. Now, normally Tuesday, November 12th means absolutely nothing to anybody unless you were born on that day. So happy birthday. I'm guessing we'll get a couple people in here today who have this birthday. However, it's also the start of the NBA Cup, and that makes today a little bit more exciting. So if you're excited, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when everything goes live. I'm Josh Engleman, by the way, joined by DK. Follow him on Twitter at DK__DFS. What's going on, man? You excited for the NBA Cup?
I actually am kind of excited. I liked it last year. It'll be interesting how teams play it in the first game. I know last year, kind of in like the second to last or the last game, you would see teams even in blowouts kind of play for point differential. So it'll be interesting to see if like any teams do that early on. Like if teams getting blown out, do they keep the starters in a little bit longer? So I'm curious to see. I'm curious actually if you have any thoughts on that.
It's going to be tricky. Like parts of me in a competitive matchup, I think that we see slightly increased playing time to the main dudes for both teams in those situations. The tricky spot will be like a team like Boston today, because clearly they have one real goal in mind, and that is being healthy enough to win the NBA title at the end of the season. Do they look at this matchup if they're up 20 heading into the fourth quarter and think, well, let's make that 40-point differential means a ton in this one, and then they just juice these guys? I tend to think no, like nothing crazy in those situations, especially with the way, I mean, like, I don't know if the rest of the league is just going to think about what has happened so far this season, but everybody's hurt. The laundry list of legitimate stars that have been dinged up over the first 3 or 4 weeks of this is kind of staggering. So there are teams that I think will play this aggressively. There are teams that I think will just play it like it's a normal day. And then there are teams that are probably going to be like the game state dependent for some of it. Maybe that'll all look dumb, but like at the end of the day, if you end up seeing, well, who would be a good example? Like Golden State, I think could be an interesting example here, depending on how they want to approach it. Does Steve Kerr consolidate rotations in the NBA Cup and see, pick a 10-dude rotation, and then a bunch of these guys end up getting a couple more minutes than we expected. A couple of them end up out of the rotation. That seems feasible to me. But I kind of feel like it's a lot like last year, where I feel like whatever I think is, I'm just going to get it wrong on the first day.
Yeah, that's a good point on the rotations. Like the teams that run a deep rotation, like Golden State, some of these other teams as well. Like, do they condense it a little bit? It's definitely in the range of outcomes for sure. But yeah, I'll be very curious. I'll be keeping a close eye on like how teams play it today. And then maybe we can get a good idea of how they'll play it going forward.
Well, we got a lot to talk about, so let's do it. Game number one, the aforementioned Boston Celtics hosting the Atlanta Hawks, who are just like a morgue at this point, just a bunch of guys that are totally dead to you if you're approaching this slate. I'm pulling it up right now just so I don't miss any of the names, but no Bogdan Bogdanovic, Kobe Bufkin, DeAndre Hunter, Vit Krejci, Seth Lundy, Trae Young, and Cody Zeller. Also, just figure something to do with Cody Zeller. Clearly, he's not going to be on the team forever, but get him off your books. We're seeing some ownership coming into this game because of the lack of players that exist for Atlanta. It's like 10 to 15 on Jalen Johnson across both sites. 10's coming into Dyson Daniels on DraftKings. A little bit's coming into Garrison Matthews because they don't have a lot of guys that sort of play that role. But I'm probably burying the lead because Keaton Wallace is currently projected for 70% ownership on DraftKings and 40 on FanDuel, where he's 4K. Is it like, obviously you can get away from anybody in any individual lineup. Is Keaton Wallace just like the easiest guy to click on today?
Definitely. I mean, this Hawks team, they're kind of out of guards, right? So pretty sure he's going to pick up the start. They need some playmaking. He can definitely provide that. He's basically the min price. And with Keaton Wallace, I think even if this game gets out of hand, which is definitely possible, like he can close in the blowout too. So I think even though he's getting a lot of ownership, it's pretty hard to get away from Keaton Wallace today. Now, Jalen Johnson was someone that was getting a little bit more ownership earlier in the day that has dropped. He has really nice rates without Trae Young on the court. Like he's a 34% usage rate with Trae Young off the court, and a 30% assist percentage. It's just a matter of, can this Atlanta team keep it competitive against Boston? And then we just got news recently that both Jason Tatum and Al Horford are in. So maybe a little bit less likely this game can stay competitive, but I like the upside quite a bit on Jalen Johnson. I'm just worried about, will he get the full complement of minutes? I do think also Garrison Matthews is a reasonable value play there at 3.7K. He should get a bump in minutes as well, just because this team needs offense, they need shooting. He can provide that. So I think my two favorite plays right now are Keaton Wallace, Garrison Matthews. I like the upside there on Jalen Johnson. I think it's a little tougher to get to the bigs in the slate. We have a lot of good center plays as we usually do. So like Capella, Okongwu, I think it's kind of tough to get to. Ricochet is not getting much ownership. But again, his price is up. So I'd say I'm mainly looking to the two cheap guys, and then Jalen Johnson.
Do you think Wallace closes in a blowout too?
I think he does. Yeah.
Yeah. I think he's playing 30 plus barring injury or foul trouble. I don't know how he comes off the course. They just don't have other dudes like him. And if you start taking off guys like Jalen Johnson, you're really removing anybody that has the ability to do anything with the basketball. I don't think they want to run out the Larry Nance, Muhammad Gay, David Roddy, Garrison Matthews. They're out of people at that point. So I feel like he's just playing, and that really makes it appealing.
Right. And that also leads, I think the last time Atlanta got blown out, I want to say Ricochet closed too. He came back in. I'm actually going to check on that.
That wouldn't surprise me either.
Yeah, he did. So it was actually against this Boston team. They got destroyed. Ricochet started, and then he closed in a blowout with Garrison Matthews, Roddy, Barlow, and Mo Guy, however you pronounce it. So Ricochet also has the opportunity to close, even if this game does get out of hand.
There we go. Anything else here we should be touching on for Atlanta? I think we kind of covered this. Like guys like Jalen Johnson, you could always just have. It's not that he looks great. It's not that he looks bad. He's just, should be in that 10 to 20% owned range. If you want to take a bit of a stand, I get it. If you think this game can be competitive, he probably has to have a part of it. But the Atlanta side's tough because they're running into a buzzsaw in the defending champs. And the defending champs have everybody that they normally have, save for Kristaps Porzingis. So this looks like it should be a beating. They're not really getting any ownership. It's, around 5% for Tatum and Brown and White. Drew Holiday is the only guy into double digits, 10% on DraftKings, 16 on FanDuel. How do you want to approach Boston here? Because, guys like Tatum are certainly getting dwarfed by your Giannis's today, who looks fantastic. Their value plays are all sort of a little bit more expensive because they don't really mess around with their rotation all that much. I find it tough to want to single out a particular Boston guy, but I wouldn't really be mad if any of them showed up.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel when this team is fully healthy. I like the ceiling on a lot of these guys. So if you wanted to mix some of these guys in as lower owned options, I don't think it's a bad idea. Maybe if you are playing Jalen Johnson in your lineup, it could make some sense to run it back with one of these main Celtics because, if the Hawks can keep it competitive, most likely Johnson's having a really big game. And if the Hawks do keep it competitive, probably one of these main Celtics are having a pretty solid game. So I don't hate that little idea there in tournaments, but Drew, Brown, Tatum, Derek White, I think are all fine. Well, Derek White's the price is up a little bit on him. Maybe not as excited about White, but I think Tatum, Brown, and Drew are all reasonable. Last game, they went back to the normal starters, Horford at the 5, so it makes it a little bit trickier to get to Kata. You also have Cornette back too. The price is up a bit on Pritchard. There's a chance Pritchard, early in the year, was closing a lot of blowouts, but last few blowouts, he hasn't. So I just wanted to mention that. So yeah, I think any of the main Celtics are playable, but definitely no standouts.
Well, we just got a little piece of news. I was about to cough. Emmanuel Quickly to miss at least a week with a partially torn UCL in his elbow.
Okay, so back to Davion Mitchell in the starting lineup then.
Oh man, Spags is probably
that's his boy.
Squirting everywhere today. Big time day for old Davion. So yeah, that came out. It's funny, that didn't come with a Emmanuel Quickly out or anything tweet, just that he's going to miss for a partially torn UCL. I'm guessing it's his non-shooting elbow. Otherwise, that feels like it would be a real tough thing to come back from in a week. But I don't know. That dude snake bit apparently so far this season. Two weird ass injuries. Very different game up here. Miami and Detroit. This is one of the lower pace games for today. It's 214.5 total, which is basically in the same package of Charlotte, Orlando, and New York and Philly as the lowest total games. Big news for Miami today is no Jimmy Butler in this one. Didn't want to play in the NBA Cup, unfortunately. So we do have Tyler Hero available. We're getting a little bit of love to the main three guys from Miami. Bam is like 20 to 25% owned across DraftKings and FanDuel. Hero's only 12 on DK, but 25 on FanDuel. And then Rozier is not all that owned on DK as a point guard only option, but he has the MPE on FanDuel and a slightly cheaper price tag. He's 25% owned on FanDuel as well. So Bam, Hero, Rozier, all 25% on FanDuel, a lot lighter on DraftKings. No one else is really getting any sort of love from Miami. So, and other than basically Kevin Love, 5% ownership on FanDuel. How are you handling Bam, Hero, and Rozier? Do any of those guys stand out more than the others?
I would say Bam and Hero are probably the two preferred options there at the top. With Jimmy Butler off the court this year, you got Tyler Hero at a 30% usage rate, Bam and Adebayo about a 25% usage rate, and then Hero gets a nice assist bump as well. He's about 28% assist percentage. So those guys do look better with Jimmy Butler off the court. Also, the minutes on Bam have been solid. 39 minutes back-to-back games. 39 minutes against Minnesota was not an OT game. So that is good to see. So I think Bam and Tyler Hero are both pretty solid options at their respective price points. Again, they're getting ownership. I think they should be. Rozier, the numbers just haven't been as good for him. Usage has been down a bit. I think he's still like reasonable at 6.1K. Again, the ownership is, around that 5 to 6% ownership range. Kevin Love started last game, but got the kind of Kevin Love rotation that I thought he would, which would be one shift in the first quarter, one shift in the third quarter. Pretty hard to go to him at 4K, especially with only center eligibility. And then Haywood Highsmith, the minutes have been pretty solid on him. He moved in the starting lineup last game. However, Jaime Jaquez was on a minutes limit. So I do think Jaquez would probably take away some minutes there from Highsmith. And again, the price is up on Highsmith, so probably not going to look to him. I would say really just looking at the top guys, Bam, Hero, and Rozier, and mainly Bam and Hero.
I will say I am a believer in the Highsmith minutes, at least for this matchup, because he is uniquely able to be deployed here against either Cade or Tobias Harris, mostly Cade. He's going to be a big dude when it comes to wing scores. Now, it makes a much bigger difference when they're not at full strength and Butler's gone. Like those minutes can just be there. But I think he probably sticks around a bit just for that defensive matchup. One thing I wanted to point out, you mentioned Kevin Love's rotation. The name for that is the Keith Bogans, who notoriously was playing just the beginning of the first quarter and third quarter, I don't know, a decade ago or whenever that was. But it's notoriously known as the Keith Bogans, if you want to work that in moving forward.
It's good to know. I'll write that down.
Yeah. Now on the Detroit side, there is no ownership coming into these guys. 7% to Jaden Ivey on DraftKings, 6% to Jaden Ivey on FanDuel. Those are the two high marks for Detroit. And while I don't really like them individually, I do think those main three guys are getting a little disrespected, particularly on a day where you have a $5 90,000 person contest on DraftKings today. I think these guys look like, interesting guys to get to in a GPP to try to make your lineup a little bit different. Cade in particular, who's sort of like a pay up a bit to be contrarian type option.
Yeah, I don't hate that. Again, as you said, no one's really getting much ownership here. Low total, not really the best spot, but if you want to take shots on either the guards and Cade and Ivy, I think it's reasonable. I don't think I would look to like Tobias or Malik Beasley. Duran is back. He missed the last couple games with that ankle injury. I don't think he's going to be on a limit, so I think he'll go back to his normal like high 20s minutes. Stewart did play well when Duran was out, so maybe Stewart picks up a couple more minutes off the bench than he usually does, but Yeah, I think if you wanted to take shots on the guards in tournaments, I think it's okay, but probably not going to look to anyone else on this team.
Yeah, nobody that you're going to grab from Detroit is like a lineup priority, somebody you should have like crazy stands on. I
Mhm.
mean, if it's anybody, it's Cade, but you are taking a risk if you do something like that. But it is one of those spots where I think they're kind of a little underrepresented for what this slate is. Um, Obviously not the best environment for any of this stuff. This is a pace down spot for both teams. But there's no reason that some of their real like 1 to 1.25 fantasy point per minute guys can't have a decent day here at low ownership. So they're the type of guys that I have an eye on, particularly because this game should be ultra competitive. 1.5 point line, no Jimmy Butler. Like this is tight. This Detroit team, when everybody's healthy, is just like your standard issue, not very good team in
Mhm.
comparison to what they were at this point in time last year, which was in the midst of losing 150 games in a row or whatever that streak ended up being. A lot as many. Was it 28? 28's in my head. Pistons losing streak. It was 28. Oh my
It
God,
was,
that's
yeah.
great.
I want to say it was close to 30. I remember. Yeah.
Got it. Man, I feel smart for saying that. Anything else for the Pistons?
No, I think you're ready to move on.
Alrighty. Well, the first thing that we're going to hit on very quickly is simply just the schedule for the rest of the day. And it's the typical schedule you'd see on a Tuesday, a Wednesday, or a Friday. NBA Live Before Lock will get itself started at 6 p.m. You don't have to go anywhere. Stay right on this stream. The next show will start immediately after we leave. You'll get Greg and Eric breaking this one down and taking you all the way up until lock. When we get to lock, Greg and I will be exclusively on playback.tv/Stokastic. You guys can come and watch the games along with us. If you have a League Pass account, you can link it and just see the games the same way we do. If you don't, we have 20 VIP passes that we can hand out so you guys can hang out with us. Maybe we get some late news and we're doing some swaps. Greg and I will be talking through all of that. We'll be talking about bets. We'll be talking about ownership, and we'll just be watching games all the way up until 8 o'clock. We have 3 games tipping off at 7. We get Knicks and Philly at 7:30, but I'm assuming that's the national TV game and we can't watch it. So 3 games from 7 o'clock that we can watch and really dig into this slate. But it's a great experience. It's really fun to be on there watching the games. And for the NBA Cup, I'm like a little bit more excited to watch what we have here. I'm excited to see the courts. They have to be better than they were last year, I hope, but we shall see. So watch everything we have. But the most important thing you can do is hit that like button. We're at 140. Don't love the ratio right now. We're at like 10%. No reason we can't get that up over 200. I'd like to see a 20% ratio if we could. Oh, the Hornets and the Orlando Magic. Not exactly a fun game to look at. There is a little bit of ownership coming into a couple of these guys. For the Hornets, Trey Mann has been questionable all day. Cody Martin got added as questionable when the injury reports dropped. He is questionable with an illness. Still no Nick Richards, who's out with a right first rib fracture. My recommendation, just get that taken out. You might be able to help yourself out in some other methods of your life if you remove that first rib. And then Mark Williams continues to be out permanently with probably 100 different injuries. So Charlotte's not really grabbing any ownership. LaMelo Ball's 10% on both sites. Brandon Miller got to 7 on DK. Everybody else across both is 4 or below. But the status of Trey Mann and Cody Martin could change that equation completely and start bringing in a little bit more value here. Do you like anything from Charlotte?
Yeah, so right now, assuming that Mann and Martin both play, I don't think there's anything that stands out. I would say my favorite play probably would be a 6.6K Brandon Miller. So in the 2 games without Miles Bridges, he's had the ball in his hands a lot more, averaging 58 passes made and 7.5 potential assists in those games. And he's getting a lot of shot attempts up too. Like in the last 2 games, 16 shot attempts, 17 shot attempts. Also, one thing to note, that game did go overtime, but Miller and LaMelo Ball both played 36 minutes in regulation. So clearly there's no longer like a restriction on Brandon Miller. I know they kind of eased him back the first 2 games, but he is full go. I think both those guys can definitely play for, mid to high 30s minutes if the game does stay competitive. So I think Miller, probably my favorite play right now on Charlotte, also has, again, the nice eligibility. I'm never going to say no to a relatively low-owned LaMelo Ball. Again, does have a pretty high ceiling. Magic, though, not necessarily the best matchup. I don't think I'm going to get to any secondary pieces, assuming Mann and Martin are in. But if one or both of those guys get ruled out, Grant Williams looks better. Josh Green, I think, would have to be in play. Maybe even Seth Curry. So I'm kind of hoping that they both play because I don't really want to consider these guys. But again, if one or both get ruled out, there's definitely going to be some value there.
And this feels like a team that could very easily juice the minutes of LaMelo Ball and Brandon Miller in this NBA Cup game. Like, young team, new coach, trying to establish something. Wouldn't be surprised if this is a spot where they consolidate and like Seth Curry leaves the rotation and you're just locked into, 38 of Ball and Miller and they go balls to the wall in this first one to try to pick up a win. It's just hard to project that. Like, it's in the cards. If you want to play it like that, I get it. It's a scary spot when you're running straight into Orlando. But they feel like a team that might go for the gusto here because that's all they've really got to play for. The NBA Cup and draft pick.
Yep. I could definitely see that.
Before I hit the Orlando side, I do want to hit these two super chats. Olrat said, should I play Matthews and Wallace together on DK? You can. I don't have a problem with it. I'm sure there are plenty of positive ROI lineups that come out with those two guys.
They're also both very
answer.
cheap. Sorry. Yeah. They're both very cheap. So it's pretty easy to do that too.
Yeah. And then Jake Nunley with the super chat took down my first big tourney, 30K on a single entry, $9 from NFL Sunday. To me, that's a whole lot of coin and will be able to change my life significantly. Thanks for everything, guys. I love to see it, man. Been around for a long time and it makes me happy to see people grab a 30K payday and know that they can pay off a giant chunk of bills or go on a vacation or whatever you need it for, whatever is going to improve your life. The fact that you can do that now off of that dub is awesome. And no matter what you're choosing to do here, you're going to have a little bit extra to build up a bankroll, maybe take some shots on other contests. Maybe you get into the sports betting or pick'em side as well. Odd Shopper, build up a little bit of bankroll, use Odd Shopper. You're going to continue to print money. Go check out Greg Ehrenberg's bankroll challenge, which is, going, I don't know, like 99th percentile so far, doubling more than he's up like $150 on a $100 bankroll in 3 weeks. It's incredible.
I think he's like tripled his money already. I want to say it's close to it.
I think he's like at 260 or 270 now. That's nuts. That's absolutely nuts. Like, that's the perfect way for just about everybody that's watching this show. A large majority of people aren't necessarily playing with these massive bankrolls, and Greg's showing you that you could do it with $100 to start. And that doesn't even factor in like getting bonus bets and deposit bonuses and stuff for signing up for Odd Shopper and using those links. Get a month of Odd Shopper free, get deposit bonuses into one of those sports books or pick'em sites. Like, you can set yourself up really well, and Greg is showing you how to do it. Orlando. So obviously we're aware Paolo Banchero still out. Wendell Carter Jr. still out. Got 15% ownership coming into Franz on DraftKings, 30 on FanDuel. We got 15 coming into Suggs on FanDuel, nothing on DraftKings. Caldwell Pope's getting a little love. And then Goga Batadze, 25% owned on DraftKings at 5,300. Essentially unowned on FanDuel at 6,300. Very different plays across both of those sites. Feel free to hit me with your Franz takes. I assume they're just kind of Franz takes and he looks like a solid play. And then hit me with this Goga chalk because it feels a tad high to me.
Yeah, so I have no issue with Franz at 8.4K. Gets a nice usage and assist bump with Paolo off the court. So he's been playing well. The minutes have ticked up. He looks good. I actually still like Goga, even with this ownership. So the Magic have been involved in a lot of blowouts last few games, so we haven't really seen the starters come back. Now, I wouldn't keep an eye on the first half minutes. Like, for example, against the Pelicans a couple games ago, Goga Batadze played 19 first half minutes. Now, I don't think that's something you can really expect every single time, but I think in a competitive game, he can definitely push for over 30 minutes. It's in the range of outcomes. And then you look at the matchup on the opposite side against Charlotte, and it's like, I'm not afraid of Taj Gibson or Musa Diabate or an undersized Grant Williams. So I actually like Goga a lot here. I think I would be overweight if I was
Okay.
MMEing to that 25%. So yeah, I'm pretty high on Goga. And
Okay.
then Jalen Suggs getting no ownership on DraftKings, I think, is a little bit interesting. So he picked up 3 quick fouls last game and only played 18 minutes total. I was pretty annoyed by that because I had his over assist that day. But previous games, 33 minutes in a blowout, 36 minutes, 35 minutes. The assist numbers look pretty good too. In the 6 games without Paolo Banchero, he's averaging 57 passes made and 10.8 potential assists per game. So he's got the ball in his hands a good amount. So I think Suggs is a decent contrarian option there. We already talked about again my liking for Goga. Mo Wagner at 4-6. I think for me, I would just rather get to Goga for a little bit more. And then I'm probably not going to anyone else like KCP or De Silva or Isaac. But yeah, I think Goga and Suggs, factoring in ownership, look pretty good. And then I have no issue with Franz either.
Yeah, I don't want to undersell Goga. It's not like I don't think he looks good. He very clearly to me it looks like the easiest guy to get to from Orlando, just from a price point. I think he has the best like point per dollar mark for Orlando. I just felt like just because of the way that center works and the amount of centers that we
Mhm.
have, when somebody slips and gets that extra ownership on a day where it's just like maybe it's just a little bit of a too cheap price at this point, that's where I start to get a little bit nervous. But he does look really good. I understand why the ownership is coming in, especially against Charlotte. Randy Hunter says Paolo being out hurts the Magic defense. It does, but it doesn't really. I have them projected as a 111-1 defensive rating here. That is still like a top 5 defense, even without Paolo, because they're filling him back in with more defensive talent, more long dudes that fit this structure. This is a really good defensive team. And honestly, it doesn't even really matter who's in or out. You could take Wendell Carter Jr. out, you pop Goga Batadze in, you're still running out a really good defense. Does it lack a little bit when Mo Wagner gets out there? Yeah, but you also change up the game a little bit offensively when that happens too. But this defense, with or without Paolo Banchero, is still borderline top 5 defense. And they're facing a team that is like a bottom 8 offense. So
Mhm.
that should help out at least a little bit. They got plenty of dudes they could throw at your LaMelo Balls and Brandon Millers. Ooh. I just want to talk about a game that's interesting, and it's not happening here. We're now getting to the least interesting game on today's slate. That would be the New York Knicks, 3-point favorites in Philadelphia, 212.5 total. This is the lowest total. This is my lowest pace. Q tag Miles McBride, Q tag campaign. That McBride Q tag is very interesting because Tibbs might play those dudes 42 minutes if McBride is out. I don't know what he's going to do in that situation. If McBride is in, we know exactly what we're doing with the Knicks. Uh, and it appears that we're not playing them. 4% ownership is the max to anybody on FanDuel. Towns did get to 12 on DraftKings, but the rest of these guys are equally unowned on the DK side. Are these guys, they sort of look like a different version of Detroit for me in that I think they're a little bit underowned, and I wouldn't mind having any of them in large field GPPs because they're going to play massive minutes and somebody is bound to have a decent day, but they don't look good on paper.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel as well. With McBride and Campaign both questionable. If they get rolled out, I honestly think it's possible that like all the starters play 40 plus minutes. That's definitely in the range of outcomes. They would probably have to like dust off Tyler Kolek in that situation and play him like a little bit.
Yeah.
But I like the upside in Cat. He's been a lot more aggressive looking for a shot recently. Usage has been up, rebounding numbers been really good. The downside is again only center eligible, so relatively high opportunity cost. But yeah, any of like Hart, Bridges, OG, I think are decent plays at their respective price points. 6.8 for Hart, 6K for Bridges, 5.9 for OG. Miles McBride, if he does play, I think is an okay contrarian option. Only projecting about 1% ownership, but again, pretty secure role off the bench there, playing 25 to 30 minutes a night. So I don't hate him at 4.3 with point guard, shooting guard eligibility. No priorities here for New York, but if you landed on one of these main pieces, I think that's fine. And I think that if both McBride and Campaign get ruled out, just like a slight uptick in minutes for everyone. They're already playing big minutes, but I think you probably project them for a few more.
Do you have a preferred good player from the Knicks?
Um, Probably Cat. Yeah.
Okay. And I think that makes some sense. There's a reason he's pulling a bit more ownership here. Yeah, like, if you end up with a 1% owned Jalen Brunson, heading into Philadelphia, a place that he might just care about giving him the business just a hair more than other spots. Insert that same sort of narrative for Mikal Bridges and Josh Hart. You know, you can insert that narrative for Dante DiVincenzo.
For sure.
Pour one out for the former Nova Nick. It's rough. It's rough. That meant he must, dude, he's gonna like spit in Rick Brunson's face at the next barbecue.
Right.
But like, if Brunson really is 1 or 2% owned, like he's sort of in that Cade realm for me. Like, I'm not going to be mad if I have 10 to 15% of him in a 90,000 person contest to try to get different with like a legitimately talented offensive player. Brunson's definitely been a little bit less than what we've been used to so far this season, but still, it's in there. And if he goes into Philly and gives Philly the business, I wouldn't be shocked in any way.
Yep. I don't hate that call at all.
And then we get to Philly. I guess we should start with the most interesting piece of this. Welcome back, Joel Embiid. Wasn't sure you were ever going to get here, and well, hopefully we get to see you a bunch. I hope you're healthy the entire season. I'm tired of seeing these guys injured. I just want guys to play. For anybody that thinks that Joel Embiid is like not playing because he doesn't want to play, I promise you this is a team decision. That dude has played through a bunch of injuries while hurt and shouldn't have been playing, but is still out there. So remember, these situations are 99% the team's fault and not the player's fault. Now, we have no idea how many minutes Joel Embiid is going to be playing today. I went 30, which seems to jive with where the market is, but I'm not sure it matters. 3% ownership to Jared McCain on DraftKings. No one else is above 1. 3% to Paul George on FanDuel. No one else is higher than 1. Are they the most unplayable team on the slate?
Yes, definitely. The big question mark, as you said, is like how many minutes is Embiid going to play? Now, in previous situations where he had like extended absences, he would come back and play like mid to high 20s minutes. I think they could be a little bit more cautious with him this time, maybe play him around 25 minutes, but I definitely think 30 is in the range of outcomes. I'd be pretty surprised if he plays like 35 minutes. That would definitely surprise me. So I don't think I can get to Embiid. One other thing to note, it doesn't really matter for this slate, but Gershon Yabusele started the second half over Andre Drummond. Drummond has been struggling this year, and Yabusele's been playing relatively well. So I think there's a chance like Drummond could DNP here, and Yabusele could be the backup 5 over Drummond. But yeah, DFS wise, I mean, I think it's just really hard to get to anyone.
Only thing I would say that there for the Drummond thing is I wonder if he's just struggling because he can't handle a starting load. And if you get him back into his standard like 18 to 20 minutes of him being able to just go balls to the wall, not care about fouls, not care about anything, just be himself, that he like sort of rights the ship a little bit. But I also think, you know, Yabusele gives Philly a very different dynamic, allows you to space the floor a little bit more. You're certainly not doing that with Andre Drummond out there. That could certainly work against like Knicks second units. My expectation is that they're both playing like a decent chunk, and you see, you know, some of Yabusele technically speaking at the 4. But I do think that's live if you're just trying to like get, now that you know you have 3 centers for today, maybe you do try to grab him a little bit of rest. You also have, they are playing again tomorrow, if I'm correct. And if that's the case, like Joel Embiid clearly not playing the back-to-back, maybe you grab Drummond a little bit of rest and load him up for tomorrow to go back to that starter run. So I like the shout out. I'm actually optimistic that not that you're playing him, he's 6,800. He still has the starter salary. Like he's unplayable no matter what you think of Andre Drummond. But I'm hoping that if he can get back to just playing that backup run, he can start to be the guy that we remember from Chicago over the past 2 years.
For sure. And I think when Embiid is in, it could be like matchup dependent too. Like if a team goes small behind them, then maybe they give like Drummond a DNP that day or something. So, but yeah, I think most nights when this team's fully healthy, that Drummond still will be the backup 5. But yeah, Yabusele has played surprisingly pretty well for this team.
We've gotten multiple questions, and I got them earlier today too, about McCain. To me, he's unplayable.
Yeah, I can't go there.
I just like I don't think the minutes are there when Embiid's here now and Paul George is here. This is a game against the Knicks. This is a spot where you want to win your NBA Cup game. I just don't see him grabbing like a boatload of minutes over the top of some of these other guys, especially when you kind of need like wings and not necessarily what he's doing when Paul George and Joel Embiid are on the floor. I just don't think the minutes are going to be there now in this spot. He would need a bunch of them.
Yeah. And Last game went to overtime. Paul George did not play in overtime, so McCain picked up extra minutes there too. Just something to note. So yeah, I don't think we're gonna get 30 plus minutes from Jared McCain. I would be very, very surprised if that happens.
Likewise. Likewise. All right, folks. We're up to about 2,000 people in the door. We did get to 268 likes. So you guys are listening. We're keeping that ratio up. No reason we can't keep doing it. I assume you guys are at least mildly interested in signing up at Stokastic. We make it pretty easy. Jordan's going to drop a link in chat. There's already one in the description of this video. If you click that link, it's going to take you to a page that will allow you to sign up through one of our partners, get whatever sort of bonus you're getting from them, either on the sportsbook side or the pick'em side, whether that's bonus bets or just simply large deposit bonuses. Follow the instructions on the top of the screen when you do this. You'll get 1 month of whichever sports sims that you're looking for, along with the bonuses that are tied to whichever one of these sites that you're looking to sign up at. If you're in a legal sports betting state and you haven't hit one of those sports books, grab one of those, meet your deposit bonus, move forward. If it's one of the pick'em sites, if you're not in a legal sports betting state, but you can play pick'em, use one of the pick'em sites like Sleeper or Underdog if you haven't signed up there yet. This can get you in the door behind the paywall of Stokastic for a month. And technically, it's not costing you a cent to do it. It costs you nothing to get in on our end. The only thing that you're going to be responsible for is whatever the deposit is that you make at that site, which doesn't necessarily have to be a huge number. I would recommend, taking advantage of deposit bonuses if you can. But this gets you a lot of stuff for a very little outlay. And who knows, maybe you're using the sim tools, you finish top 3 in a contest with 5,000 or more while using our avatar, and then you get another month of the sim stacked on top of that. Then you're at 2 months and you haven't spent a cent for Stokastic. That should be the path you're looking to take. So check it all out. Click that link. Now we're a little bit more interesting here. So when we started the show, this wouldn't have been a topic of conversation, but now it is slightly more a topic of conversation. And we mentioned it at the beginning. Emmanuel Quickly now out with what the injury report says is a left elbow sprain. I guess that is technical, partially torn UCL. Q tag on Garrett Temple, which shouldn't matter. They're still missing Scotty Barnes. They're still missing Bruce Brown. They're still missing Kelly Olynyk. Now, this team was getting no love at all anywhere other than RJ Barrett on FanDuel at 7,600, pulling 14% ownership. Everybody else was like 3 or below. That's going to probably change a little bit now with Quickly gone. Do you have anybody that like immediately stands out to you? But clearly it's going to be a little bit of a bump to RJ Barrett, and Davion Mitchell is going to go from, a 20-minute run to a very different amount of minutes. Do you think that you end up getting there a bunch? 5,200 on DraftKings might be a tough sell. 4,200 on FanDuel, though. I'm expecting Davion Mitchell to look pretty good there.
Yeah, no, I think Davion would probably be the easiest guy to get to. It'll be interesting to see what the ownership update is. Expect his ownership to definitely go up. Again, he's when Quickly was out, he was starting and playing 30 plus minutes. And with Quickly and Barnes off the court this year, you have RJ Barrett with a 34% usage, Grady Dick with a 26% usage rate. So those guys obviously benefit there. And then as far as assist percentage, David Mitchell about a 30% assist percentage with those two off the court. RJ Barrett also gets a nice bump too, sitting at 32%. But looking at the price points, yeah. So I think Spags boy, Davion Mitchell would probably be my preferred option there with point guard, shooting guard eligibility. I think he's a decent play. And then I have interest in RJ Barrett at the top. I like the ceiling on him quite a bit. In a competitive game, you're probably going to see him play around 35 minutes. Like I said, he'll have the ball in his hands more now that Quickly is out. We've seen some ceiling games from Barrett already, going for 50 plus now 3 times this year. So definitely like the ceiling on Barrett. Grady Dick is definitely going to get more shots up. His price is up a bit, though. Still think he's viable now. Jakob Poeltl is going to play big minutes, assuming no foul trouble, but his price is up, so I don't really think I would get to Poeltl. The minutes on Boucher at 4.4 have been decent of late, 20 plus minutes in 4 of the last 5 games. We know he's a decent point per minute player. He's been playing some backup 5 too, which is good to see. So I think he's another reasonable value option. I don't think I would get to anyone else, but yeah, I think Davion and RJ probably my 2 favorite plays.
Yeah, I think we're on the same page there. I think those are the guys that clearly get the biggest bump from Quickly being out now, and we'll end up getting new ownership. Clearly, I'm fully expecting RJ Barrett's ownership to go up across both sites, particularly on FanDuel, where he's already getting a little bit of love. And then Davion Mitchell is going to go from someone who you shouldn't have even said his name today to someone whose name you can say, particularly on FanDuel. The fact that he's $1,000 cheaper there is going to play an interesting role. Not the best per minute guy in the world, but 4,200 certainly opens up when you are the likely starting point guard. Then we go to Milwaukee. This might be the actual easiest thing to talk about. Chris Middleton still out. Pour one out for him and, make me feel less shame. Gary Trent, probable. Andre Jackson, probable. But Damian Lillard is in the concussion protocol, going to be out here. And that is creating 68% ownership to Giannis on DraftKings, 63% ownership to Giannis on FanDuel. And I honestly can't even say that I disagree with it. He looks incredible today in comparison to everybody. To me, the very clear best pay up option.
Yep, totally agree with that. Again, he's getting a lot of ownership, but it makes sense. There's no Dame, there's no Chris Middleton. His rates with Dame off the court this year are pretty insane. 36% usage rate and a 44% assist percentage. So again, relatively small sample size, but still pretty insane numbers. And he's at a reasonable price point too, 11.3K for Giannis. Yeah, I mean, he would have been someone that I would have been high on even if Dame was playing. And now with Dame out, I mean, he just looks amazing. The tricky part for me is trying to figure out what the rest of the rotation is going to look like. We know Brook Lopez's role, we know Taurean Prince's role, but I don't know exactly who's going to start. They could go to a shooter and throw Gary Trent Jr. In there and kind of have Giannis run the point. AJ Green could definitely start. I don't think they're going to go DeLon Wright, but there's a chance, I guess. So there's just a lot of different ways this rotation can go. Do you have a lean on who you think starts for Dame?
Ryan Rollins makes sort of the most intuitive sense if you just want to put another point guard out there that has been playing as the backup point guard. I get that. I think DeLon Wright makes some sense if you think about this and you look at it well, Doc likes vets. Maybe he didn't love him as the backup for that rotation, but maybe he looks at that a little bit differently if you're putting DeLon Wright directly into the starting lineup. I could see that scenario. Or then maybe he just says, let's just get shooting on the floor and put AJ Green out there, keep that spacing up, give Giannis more real estate to just operate when you get AJ Green, buried out in some corner. You get Taurean Prince out there in the opposite corner, and you give Giannis a little bit of studio space to get downhill and get to the rim. And then, in theory, it could be Pat Connaughton, I guess. That wouldn't shock me either. Another vet on Milwaukee. It doesn't necessarily have to be a point guard because there's no replacing Dame. None of these guys play like him. It's a completely different style. I'm leaning Rollins. And I would probably give him an extra minute or two if it ends up being him, or whoever it ends up being is certainly going to get a little bit of a different minutes projection. But whoever starts does not have to be the guy that closes. That could look completely different by the time they get to that point. So it's not like I immediately see somebody go in and it's all right, well, that guy gets 30 and we move forward. It's still going to be a little murky no matter what. Right now, I'm leaning Rollins, but I don't have a ton of confidence.
Okay. Yeah. So I think ownership will definitely play a role once we do get the starting lineup. For example, if the starters is getting insane ownership and maybe the backups getting no ownership, that could be an interesting tournament play. So yeah, I think it could go to a lot of different ways. They could go to a more traditional point guard, or they could just go to a shooter. One other thing I wanted to ask you is, because this team just lacks offense now besides Giannis, do you think that they run a bit of a bigger lineup and maybe play Portis more, just kind of alongside Giannis / Brook Lopez, just because again they just need offense?
I could certainly see it. I mean, when it comes to offensive talent, this will be a pretty sobering thing for me to read off. So I have the average offensive plus minus from the Darko model and the EPM model. Giannis is at plus 4.6. We're talking about one of the best offensive players in the game. Only AJ Green gets to neutral. He is 0.0. Gary Trent is negative 0.3. Bobby Portis is negative 0.3. The rest of these guys are all aggressive negatives, only really bringing a ton of talent on the defensive side, whether that's Brook Lopez, whether that's Andre Jackson. Torian Prince definitely leans more defensive, but he's just bad on both sides. DeLon Wright is not an offensive threat, leans more defense. So if they're struggling at all offensively, Bobby Portis is probably the guy that immediately has to become a person that's more involved and probably looks pretty interesting on a second unit where if Giannis isn't on the floor, like who else is soaking up any usage? We don't have any other usage hogs on this team other than Portis and Giannis. So
Right.
it's kind of sneaky. Price probably a little higher than you'll want it to be, but you can see the path to more minutes at least.
I want to say too, last year or maybe 2 years ago, I think they ran like the three big lineup out there. One game with Giannis, Portis, and Brook Lopez. I could be wrong, but I think they might have done that one year. I don't think they're going to do it for this game, but just the reason I thought like, oh, maybe Portis does play a little bit more, just how shorthanded this team is.
I'm going to try to do this as fast as I can because we're already running up against it. So over this year and last year,
Yeah.
Giannis, Portis, Lopez on. They played 34 minutes together. They were negative 18 in those 34 minutes. So hasn't been something they've relied on too much, but at the same time, when that happens, it's going to happen when you don't have a bunch of real NBA players to put out there. So sometimes you just have to put your best foot forward and put guys on the floor. And for Toronto, it's not like they have an offense that you're like super nervous about having a bad defensive lineup out there. So might wall off the rim at least a little bit. Do you want to do anything with Lopez or Prince? Brook Lopez is 34% owned on FanDuel at 5,200.
That ownership feels a little bit high. I mean, I'm not going to be mad about getting to him at that price point, but feels a little bit high, especially on FanDuel. There's only one center. Torian Prince, I mean, I guess is okay, but I'm not going to go out of my way to play him either.
Okay. Phoenix and Utah. Very interesting game for this one. We've got injury news on both sides. Kevin Durant, obviously not playing here for Phoenix. Everybody else that's normally in is in. We're getting a lot of ownership here. 35 to 45 for Booker across both sites. In and around 20 to 30 for Beal. Around 20 for Tyus Jones. 25 for Yusuf Nurkic on DraftKings. 10 on FanDuel. He is questionable, by the way. And that carries a lot of weight. 33% ownership coming into Grayson Allen at 3,700, 18 on FanDuel. Those five guys are pulling a ton of ownership. Who separates from the pack for you?
Yeah, so the Nurkic news obviously is pretty important because that could open up some good value if he gets ruled out. Would assume that Mason Plumlee would pick up the start and then probably Oso would get some backup 5 run. Also think they could go a little bit small ball. They have shown that they do want to play small ball here and there. Last game, I was a little bit surprised that it was Dunn that picked up the start over Royce O'Neal. I thought they would definitely go to Royce with KD out, but they went to Ryan Dunn. The minutes weren't amazing on Dunn, but did want to mention that. The ownership, a lot of it is going to Booker, Grayson Allen, Nurkic. I mean, I think for me right now, Booker and Beal probably the two preferred options. In that most recent game with KD off the court, Booker had 24 potential assists. He also has a 26% usage rate with KD off the court. So the ceiling's pretty high there in Booker. Surprised that Beal's ownership's not insane and he has nice eligibility. The price is reasonable at 7K. So like him at about 15%. Tyus Jones, I think, is another fair option. The ownership feels a little bit high in Grayson Allen. He was getting very low ownership lastly. I kind of liked him as a contrarian play. But over 30% does feel a little bit high. However, he is going to get more shots up. I want to say it was 13 shots up last game for Grayson Allen. So he's a fine value play. And then, Nurkic, if he does play, like the upside in him, the minutes have ticked up on Nurkic recently. So if he does play, he has like 30 plus minutes in his range outcomes.
Are you assuming it's done again, or do you think Allen sneaks in and looks even better?
Against Utah, I mean, they're relatively big. I don't know. I think it could be Allen / Royce. It's definitely possible.
Okay. Now the Utah side, Keontae George is probable. He was questionable earlier today. He got upgraded. But it didn't go the same way for Walker Kessler, who is out with right hip soreness for today. 22% ownership coming into John Collins on DraftKings at 6,300. 21% coming into John Collins on FanDuel. You get Markkanen right around 10% and basically nothing to anybody else. Little tiny bit of Sexton on FanDuel. So how do you want to handle John Collins here now? Looking a little bit different with no Walker Kessler.
Yeah, so I guess my question to you is, are you Do you think for sure he starts? 'Cause I don't think it's a guarantee that he starts. I think it's definitely possible that Utah could go to Drew Eubanks in the starting lineup, or even Filipowski. Filipowski played over Eubanks last game and played relatively well and actually closed that game. So I think it's possible they could go to one of those starters. Last year, like when the Jazz were a little bit banged up in the front court, I remember they would start like Omar, they would start like Yurt 7 over like,
Yeah.
I think it was Kessler. I want to say it happened a few times. So I definitely think it's possible that they go to one of those guys over Collins. If Collins starts at the 5, he is definitely the guy that I like the best in Utah, 6.3K. So he would look really good if he starts. And then Lauren Markkinen, I like as well. I think everyone else is pretty hard to get to unless they go to one of those other guys we talked about in the starting lineup. Like the guards kind of splitting minutes with Sexton and Clarkson. You got George, you got Collier, who I think will kind of play the backup point. So mainly look into the front court guys. And whoever starts at the 5, I think would be the preferred option. But yeah, do you think it's for sure Collins, or do you think it could be one of those other guys?
I'm assuming it's Collins.
Okay.
That does make the Utah defense like 1,000 times worse than it is otherwise, which is hard because it's already bad when it's Walker Kessler. Eubanks would undoubtedly improve that defensive outlook if they wanted to go that direction. I mean, these Phoenix guys should be able to get to the rim at will. That's not necessarily their game. They love to live in the mid range, or at this point now that they're under Bud, get some threes up. So I'm expecting Collins. I'm intrigued by the Eubanks part because I do actually think that makes the team maybe not better, but I don't think they need what John Collins brings. And I think they need a little bit of defense, considering this entire team is a gigantic negative. There's not a single positive defensive player on this team other than Eubanks, and that is barely the case. It's not like Eubanks is some stopper. It's bad on the Utah side. But yeah, if Collins isn't starting, you're at least like not as stoked to click on his name, but still certainly in play, could close. You know, he could play his way into that same amount of minutes. If Eubanks starts at flat 3,500 on DraftKings, that will at least have to have a little bit of appeal.
Yeah, no, if Eubanks starts, I think he'd be a pretty good value. Now, I don't think you would project him for like the minutes that Walker Kessler was getting,
No.
but he doesn't need that many minutes, right? He's what, 3.5, I want to say. Wait, where is
Yeah, he's 3,500.
Yeah, 3,500. Yeah. So like if he starts, he's definitely going to be in play for value.
All righty. So keep your eyes on that one, guys. Very important to get that Utah starting lineup. One more call for likes. We're at 363, 500 in our sights. Dallas and Golden State. Mavs are 2.5-point dogs at the Warriors. 234.5 total. By far the highest total on today's slate. It's not really creating a ton of ownership on the Dallas side, but we do have injury news that we are waiting on. Q tag Derek Lively, doubtful tag on PJ Washington, so probably going to get him back soon enough. 10 to 15% ownership on Luka, 5 to 10 on Kyrie, 10 to 15 on Clay. Basically it for Dallas here. Now, if Lively's out, you probably look a little bit closer at Daniel Gafford on DraftKings, and then you cover your eyes when you look at him on FanDuel. How are you handling Luka, Kyrie, and Klay Thompson heading to Golden State in a Dallas uniform?
Yeah, so I know I already had some questions about Klay Thompson and the revenge narrative. I'm not a big narrative person, but yeah, Klay's 5.1K. He's got shooting guard, small forward eligibility, so like he's definitely playable. He should play 30 plus minutes if this game does stay competitive. Just a matter of can he make his shots. I do kind of like Luka though at around 10% ownership. I like the ceiling on him. A little bit surprised he's not getting more love. That's a fair price point. So like the upside there on Luka. I think I prefer him to Kyrie. Again, neither of those guys are getting a ton of ownership. And then as far as the center situation goes, I am expecting Lively to play. He went through practice yesterday, so I'm expecting him to play. If he doesn't, it's going to be Gafford probably getting a bump in minutes, and then Dwight Powell's been playing the back of 5. I do think Kleba could play though against like a smaller ball Golden State team. He didn't play last game. He was available, so I do think Kleba could play. And the last guy I wanted to mention was Najee Marshall, coming in a little bit less than 10% owned right now, 4.6K. Averaging about 30 minutes over the last couple games. So I think he's a decent contrarian value play.
I think we're basically on the same page here. Like I see Najee Marshall as kind of the fourth dude you can get to here, a little bit behind those other three. And he was somebody that showed up 8% optimal for me, 7% owned. So I could see the appeal there. Then you get to Golden State. I'm just going to start with the craziest one that I see. 4,200 on DraftKings, 4,600 on FanDuel. DeAnthony Melton is 30% owned. I kind of understand it. You know, he's been back for 2 games, played 27 minutes last time out. Things were going well. Should he be 30% owned? Because that's terrifying. Like they have so many dudes. I wouldn't be surprised if he played 12 minutes and they played Peyton and Moody and Anderson and Pajemski. But at the same time, like what if it happens again? Then he is a really nice value because he's a 0.95 fantasy point per minute guy.
Yeah, this one's a tricky one. I think he's going a little bit overowned just because we know the way that Golden State runs their rotation. He did play a lot of minutes last game. Like he played 27 minutes, but I think if he comes out and struggles a bit, like he could very easily, I think like 15 minutes is in the range of outcomes for D'Anthony Melton. So if he was, getting not as much ownership, I would like him more. But since the field is already there, and he's over 30% owned, I think I'm willing to take the risk and go underweight or in full fade. But it definitely scares me because Melton is a good point per minute player. So that one does scare me a little bit. Andrew Wiggins, I believe, still questionable. Could open up a few more minutes for some of these wings if he gets ruled out. But yeah, Steph Curry, I think is fine for tournaments. Draymond Green is 5.5. He's getting about 10% ownership. He should play like high 20s to 30 minutes to around 30 minutes. Like he's reasonable. But yeah, the ownership right now on Melton does scare me a bit.
Yeah, this whole team just scares me. This is the weirdest spot to me because I think they could do absolutely anything. They could continue to just play 12 dudes every night and everybody's scattered and you have no confidence in who you're clicking on. By the way, Andrew Wiggins, also questionable. I don't know if you said it, but that is a piece that could change this up a little bit and shorten that rotation. Maybe they consolidate, maybe they don't. But I'm terrified of the Warriors here. And we're also getting 10% ownership to Curry, Green, and Wiggins right now. I'm just nervous about Golden State. The only name that I wouldn't be nervous about clicking on is Steph.
Mm-hmm. But as you said too, like it's definitely possible that Golden State could trim down their rotation. Maybe they remove the likes of like Looney or Gary Payton or Moody or someone like that, and they go to like 9 or 10 guys. I think that's definitely possible too.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if Melton comes in a little lighter on this ownership. Doesn't strike me as like a natural guy that people just click on because they're building their lineups. Even if he does look good, like I could see 25 being where it actually ends up, and it looks a little bit better. But yeah, if you're a believer in the minutes that Melton got last time, you see him continuing to start and be a part of, competitive closing matchups. He's definitely a guy you want to get to in this spot because of his talent defensively. You can deploy him to Kyrie Irving or have him chase around someone like Klay Thompson. So I like the defensive setup for it. It just feels like the ownership's a hair too high.
Yep, agree.
And finally, we close it out for the 2,500 of you that are here. Minnesota Timberwolves, 8.5-point favorites in Portland, 220.5 total. Minnesota's the exact same team we always talk about. No injury news. One huge piece of injury news here, though. DeAndre Ayton is questionable. And if he ends up out and we get to project 48-ish minutes to Donovan Clingan and Time Lord, who is in at 3,100, same as Clingan, also has power forward eligibility. Being able to swap to something like that for Portland will be the best value you'll find. It's all about whether or not you have those options. On the Minnesota side, 10 to 15% ownership on Ant, 10 on Randall on DK, 20 on FanDuel, around 10 for Gobert and McDaniels, 15 for Conley on both sites. Reed got to 15 on FanDuel. We know what we're doing here for Minnesota. Does anybody stand out, or are you just like, okay, if I get one of these 8 guys, that's fine?
Yeah, I don't think there's a standout, but I do kind of like these guys. I think they're going a little bit overlooked right now. Conley's getting the most ownership. I'm okay not going there. DiVincenzo coming in about half the ownership of Conley. I know he's a little more expensive, but he's just been playing a lot more. He's been playing high 20s minutes. So I think I'd rather get to DiVincenzo over Conley, factoring that ownership. But I think any of the front court guys are reasonable here. Gobert, a fair price point. Randall, Naz Reid at 5.2. We know that he does have a pretty high ceiling. I do like Ant as a contrarian spend up. Again, coming in sub 10% ownership right now. So like the ceiling on him, sub 9K price point. Thought he would get a little bit more love. And then NAW, the minutes have ticked up a little bit on him, 20 plus minutes in, I believe, the last 4 or 5 games. So I think he's another reasonable contrarian value option. But yeah, no standouts, but I think any of these like main rotation guys are decent plays.
Kind of see it the same way. Like we know what they do. They are a team that, like, especially in this situation, I expect them to just have those 8 dudes in this NBA Cup. Maybe they, lean a little bit heavier on the starters. Probably not all that necessary when you play Portland. Also, playing Portland is the real problem. They don't have anybody that you can just know you're getting to and make your life easier for swaps later on. There's 0 ownership coming into anybody from Portland. 10% gets to Kamara on FanDuel. but they are the most interesting late swap possibility because the value on Donovan Clingan and or Robert Williams will be crazy if that news comes out early enough. So do you try to play it and set yourself up to be able to swap to that? Do you just set yourself up to have a bunch of Portland and then, swap your way out of it as news is coming? I'm not entirely sure what you do here. But if Ayton is in, I would just ignore Portland in a terrible matchup against Minnesota. But if he's out, one of Donovan Clingan or Robert Williams is going to look damn good.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. The Ayton news, I think, is the most important one in the slate. And it's tricky because it is a late game. I wanted to mention one thing. Shaedon Sharpe moved into the starting lineup last game. He did play 14 first half minutes. It's just that the game turned into a massive blowout. So he could definitely play like 28, 29 minutes tonight, but still doesn't really stand out at the price point. The really interesting part here is just the centers, right? Because if DeAndre Ayton gets ruled out, you're probably going to get 48 minutes from Clingan and Robert Williams. I think both will look amazing. Robert Williams has been playing alongside Clingan a bit, some 4, but I think in that situation, they would probably just play strictly the 5. Now, you do have one other late game. So you could leave a little bit of flexibility, maybe, 2 or 3 spots in your lineup and move some stuff around depending on what happens. In a situation like this, on this slate, when you have this late news, usually I am going to kind of take the risk or maybe kind of play for it. And then if Ayton gets ruled in, I can still move some stuff around. But I just think the ceiling is massive. Like if we get Clingan starting for DeAndre Ayton, and like if we get the ownership or if we get the news late, like let's just say we get this news like post the 8 o'clock Central games, there's only 2 games left. Like he's going to be way lower owned than he should be. So in situations like this, I'm willing to take the risks. I'm looking for the upside, right? I'm looking to kind of win tournaments, not just min cash. So, I think it's a really, really interesting spot here. And again, keep an eye on the news. But one of those 2 centers, I think both would be good plays. But whoever starts will just be a smash play if DeAndre Ayton does get ruled out.
I'm here for Ayton getting ruled out and Portland running out the 16-16-16 split between Donovan Clingan, Robert Williams, and the in mothballs Dwop Reith.
Definitely see it.
Final piece of news before we turn this one over to the Live Before Lock crew. Trey Mann out, Cody Martin in. DK, tell the people where to find you.
Yeah, you guys can find me on Twitter. That's DK__DFS or on YouTube at DKDFS.
There it is, everybody. Hit that like button, 74 more to run it up to 500 for Live Before Lock. Greg, Eric, incoming. And then at 7 o'clock, you get myself and Greg on playback. Have some fun, folks. NBA Cup is here. Good luck.
Mhm. Yep.
What is happening, guys, and welcome to NBA Live Before Lock, where we got the start of the NBA Cup, and already news breaking just as Eric and I are about to start the show. A tale as old as time, because we have found out that Tre Mann, he is not going to be playing. That is news that just broke a few minutes ago, and Tre Mann's been pretty damn good this year. Do you remember how the Hornets got Tre Mann by chance, Eric?
Oklahoma City. So it was definitely the Gordon Hayward trade. It has to be.
Yep, that was the trade. It was Tre Mann for Gordon Hayward.
I know ball.
That seems to be going pretty well in the favor of the Charlotte Hornets, where you got OKC, doesn't have Gordon Hayward. He retired after doing nothing last year. And now looks like the Hornets got themselves a nice young player who's not going to be playing for today. And he might not be the only guy who's out, because we still have a number of players who are questionable on the injury report. So we're going to go over some of those situations. We're going to talk about who are the value pieces that we feel like we can't get away from early, or what we want to do to approach our lineups, and what we're going to do in the Sims with all these guys who are questionable. Also, a pretty good night for you guys to check out Josh and I on Playback right at 7 p.m. Eastern time after this show ends. Josh and I are going to be heading on over to Playback, and considering the players who are questionable on the injury report, Eric, and the start times of those games, I doubt we're going to be getting that news during this show, at least not for some of these guys. Like for the late games, Nurkic is questionable. Wiggins is questionable. Ayton is questionable. Those are all massive, massive pieces that are going to really potentially impact the slate in big ways, especially like if Nurkic is out, cheap value in Phoenix. If Ayton is out, cheap big men in Portland. And then you've also got Derek Lively. He's questionable. He could be returning. Miles McBride is questionable. And you look at how thin the Knicks are. If McBride doesn't play, like is Jalen Brunson playing 40 minutes today? Cam Payne is also questionable. So you get to a situation if Payne and McBride are out, Tom Thibodeau already doesn't like going to his bench. He's only got one guy off the bench he really likes going to. That's Miles McBride. If he's out, that can mean massive minutes for the Knicks starters. So lots of interesting things that could end up happening over the course of the show. First and foremost, if you guys could do us a favor, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you got a question for me in the Discord channel, it does come with any of the Stokastic memberships. Hit me up. I'm on the lookout for any of those questions. Eric, what's up?
Yeah, it's going to be one of those slates, man. Definitely utilize your bankroll appropriately to your risk tolerance, because it's risky in the streets today. And that was kind of the main thing that, from a betting perspective, you're constantly just churning out positive EV bets for the people over on X. And you can do that throughout the day. But I just don't know how you build DFS lineups until you get those type of pieces of news. And so I'm usually a fan of that coming out as late as possible, trying to just build in with some of this value. But it is insane because Robert Williams, how many minutes can he even get up to? Klingon, I assume, would get the start there for Portland. This is the late night hammer, and it's a game that no matter how wonky it gets, you got to have some kind of a big out on the floor. And I doubt that they're terribly worried about either of those minutes between Klingon and Time Lord. But we've got Phoenix. It could end up being Mason Plumlee season. We have so many ways that this slate is just you want to be backloading lineups. And then you got Giannis at power forward, who's just standing out amongst every other stud. There's not really Joel Embiid now that we got 25 to 30 minutes. I don't know how crazy I want to go trying to build him into lineups, considering center is extremely valuable. I mean, what's your overview of this slate, knowing that we have so much news that we absolutely need to know? And I would want to play Ayton at 6,200 if he ends up in.
Yeah. So here's the good part is there is a lot of value on the Phoenix Suns because Kevin Durant is out. So you got this situation where Nurkic is questionable, and I'm already getting to a good amount of Phoenix. I've got Tyus Jones in lineups. I've got Grayson Allen in lineups. So we got guys on the low end who are value options getting to. Then on the mid-range, I'm getting Bradley Beal in lineups. I'm getting on the high end, Devin Booker in lineups. And what's nice about that is I feel it's going to give me a lot of flexibility for when that Nurkic news does end up coming out. And then, of course, since that game starts a little bit later, it's not the exact same start time as the Warriors game or the Blazers game. But I do think there's a little bit better of a chance that by 9 p.m. Eastern time, we're going to have that news, and that'll make swaps a little bit easier. So I think where it gets interesting is what we do if, say, Nurkic is in, and then we don't have the news yet for Eaton or for Wiggins. The Wiggins news, I don't think is going to massively alter my lineups in any real way, just because the Warriors play such a deep bench and they have so many guys they could go to. It would make other guys slightly look better, but there's not like a surefire value. Whereas if you get a situation where Ayton's out, if they start Robert Williams, I wouldn't expect 30 minutes from Williams or anything, but I would definitely want to be playing him at almost a minimum salary. I might have to forego some of the value in the late game if we're at the 9 p.m. mark and we don't have the news yet for 10 p.m. because I'm not going to hold out that long for the lineups. It's just going to be hard at that point.
Yeah, it's really hard, but that's kind of what we're up against here with the slate. So as we're talking about everything, when you're asking us 2v2 questions, when you're giving us super chats, keep in mind that there's a lot about this slate that we don't know. There's a ton of unknown. I think the easiest way that I'm dealing with it is I have a ton of Nurkic just built into lineups. I think he's one of the most undervalued plays on the slate. That's shown in our tools. He's showing up for me a lot in the Sims. I'm just going way overweight to him and hoping we maybe get that news like 15, 20 minutes before the Phoenix-Utah game locks, like the Minnesota-Portland news. That is the Portland side of things with Ayton. And then I can kind of adjust. Again, Ayton, 1 or 2% Ayton at 6,200 against Gobert if this game were to stay somewhat competitive, which I'm kind of hoping it doesn't. I have Minnesota 8.5, but I think that this is going to be one of those slates where whatever questions you're asking, keep in mind how big of an edge it is if you're able to react to that news.
I'm looking through some of the lineups I have, the players who are in lineups. Here are 2 players that, as I'm thinking about it more, that I'm going to do a positive ROI boost for to get a little bit more exposure for the 10 p.m. games and get some more flexibility. Steph Curry, $8,300. Mm-hmm. I'll bump him a little bit. And also, $8,300 Steph Curry, there's obviously a ceiling for him in that price point. If I just end up on like 20% of Steph Curry and I'm 2x the field on him, I don't hate that as an outcome for my lineups if I just have a little bit more of him. Another one as well, Rudy Gobert, $6,400, 11% on against the Portland Trailblazers. I think these are the 2 guys that I'll give myself a little bit of an ROI boost to give myself a little bit more backloaded lineups with flexibility. But there's not going to be like, I'm not going to like ROI boost Robert Williams to get him into lineups or anything like that for any of the cheap guys. I'm going to do the Gobert. I'm going to do the Steph Curry. And then I'll hope that if those players get ruled out, that gives me just enough flexibility to maybe make some swaps.
Yeah, for me, it's going to be Nurkic and Gobert or Nurkic and Ayton, kind of the guys that I'm boosting purely because I want those centers. I want those center spots to be very, very swappable. I want to have the opportunity to have Giannis be played, but I want to play him at power forward. I don't want to be utilizing a center spot on him purely because you could be looking at 25, 30-point projections on guys like Robert Williams and Klingon here, where you don't want to forego studs from the early section. You definitely will have studs already built into the lineups. You brought up Beal and Booker as guys that are making sense. And then, of course, Steph Curry, 8,300 like that. Luka Doncic for raw points. If you get 2 $3,100 guys in Williams and Klingon that can show up in your life. But yeah, it's a this is the wildest slate that I can remember. And I love that DraftKings finally brought these late games back. I would be really bummed out to have a 5-game slate or a 6-game slate and not have Dallas, Golden State, Minnesota, Portland on it. It's just such a huge edge to the people paying attention.
Shout out to Jake Nunley, who left a super chat. He says, took down my first big tournament, $30,000 on a single $9 entry on NFL on Sunday. So yeah, shout out to Jake there. He says, to me, that's a whole lot of coin. It will be able to change my life significantly. Thanks for everything, guys. Yeah, that rules. I love to hear that, Jake. Hopefully you're playing with the Stokastic avatar. And if you were, tweet at us at the Stokastic HOF, because you'll also be able to get yourself a free subscription off that and $30,000 to get yourself one of those full rings as well. So if you're using that Stokastic avatar, tweet it at us. And if you guys are not using the Stokastic avatar, download it. Make it your avatar on DraftKings, FanDuel. Super, super easy way to get yourself some free stuff, free subscription to the site. There's no downside to it. Lofty always likes to say that, what are you getting out of a picture of your dog as your avatar? It looks nice, but you're not going to get anything extra out of it if you end up winning. People see your dog, be like, hey, that's a cute dog. But nobody's giving you free stuff because your dog wins. You are going to get some free stuff if you win a GPP with that Stokastic avatar. So go check that out. And if you need the link to the avatar, there's a link down below for that in the YouTube description box. Let's start talking about this Trey Mann news, because now that Mann has been rolled out, our projections are updated. What does this change for you from the Charlotte Hornets? Does it make LaMelo more in play? Does it bring Brandon Miller more in play? Is there a value option you like, or is this just not really all that significant?
Not crazy significant for me, purely because we've seen Seth Curry can kind of just get thrown in there, maybe eat up a couple more minutes. We saw him playing 27, 29 minutes with Brandon Miller out. I'm assuming they can kind of do the same thing with Trey Mann coming off, well, with Seth Curry coming off the bench there. I think it makes a ton of sense. It's also a top 5 defensive team here in Orlando. I mean, you go through everything that they're capable of doing with Goga Bitadze on the floor here so far this season. 107 defensive rating, 108.3 adjusted defensive rating on dunks and threes for the entire year. Goga Bitadze definitely is out there for defensive purposes, with him getting the bulk end of the minutes here, and this entire, the guard rotation of Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Jalen Suggs, Anthony Black off the bench. I mean, this is just not a spot where I think I need to try to get anything crazy. Maybe a tick up for LaMelo Ball, but nothing that I'm really going to be getting to account for it.
Yeah, I think it does increase the minutes ceiling a little bit for LaMelo in this spot, assuming he could avoid foul trouble. The fouls have been absurd for him this year. It seems like there's been so many slates where he's going well, and then all of a sudden he just picks up a bunch of fouls really quick and he has to come off the court. One other thing I want to ask you really quick related to playing time. We saw some of this last year with the NBA Cup, where teams took these games a little bit more seriously than the normal NBA game, just a regular season game. And one thing that is different about the format as well is if you are tied with another team in your bracket who is going to advance, it is going to depend on the point differential. So we saw some games last year. One that stuck out to me that I remember was
Boston.
There was a Bulls game where there was a Celtics one too, where they left the starters in when it was,
and that was against the
massive
Bulls
blowout to run up the score a little bit. And there was a Bulls game too, where there was some point differential situation, and it was like a 25-point game with a minute and a half left, and they were fouling to create more possessions in the game for more opportunity for the point differential. So Data Team was going over some of the results from last year, and a couple of things that stood out to me that Rich and Jason were able to find for us while they're doing projections today. So during the NBA Cup last year, on average, players who were meaningful parts of the rotation played about half a minute more. Not a crazy amount, but still, it was something that ultimately is something to consider. If somebody scores 1.5 fantasy points per minute, makes a little bit of a difference. If you're now projecting for another, like 0.75 fantasy points, the players that were impacted the most, the star players. The star players last year, over the course of the regular season, Eric, there were only 8 players that averaged 35 plus minutes per game. But in the NBA Cup, there was 35 players that averaged, I think there was a number, either 35 or 28. Let me actually just pull that back up, the message that Rich had sent. It was 28 players. Yeah, so during the regular season, it was 36 minutes per game. There was 9 players that averaged it, but in the NBA Cup, 28 players. So star players saw a little bit more of a bump than some of the regular players. Is that going to impact how you approach this slate at all?
No. 2 reasons why. I'm going to explain it. I talked about it a little bit last night on the betting show, but like here are my 2 major issues that I have. One is that entire scenario was brand new last year. It hadn't played out. We didn't know how teams were going to handle it. They ended up ramping it up, but then what did the Lakers get out of it after the fact? How many times after, a week or 2 of making fun of them acting like they won an NBA championship, did anybody give a shit? I haven't thought about it until it showed up on the schedule yesterday, where I was like, oh, that NBA Cup is back. Joy. I think that's the way that most people have thought about this. And I know that they want this to be like Premier League soccer and, having multiple tournaments and everything matters. And, you go to Europe and watch soccer over there. They have 48 different kind of cups that you can go out and win during the course of a year. But people are still gearing up for Premier League. People are still gearing up for the World Cup for their countries. Like, there's still these marked, massive things that still stand out above all of the rest. That's the NBA Finals. This might be a fun footnote, but the second part of it is how many teams are on back-to-backs. I mean, look at this year. We've got Boston playing Brooklyn tomorrow. We've got Minnesota and Portland running this entire game back. I'm going through everything because I do my betting show the night before, and I'm seeing multiple teams that are playing Tuesday into Wednesday in 11-game slates. So naturally, we have 8 today. Yeah, there's going to be some overlap of teams that are also playing over multiple slates. So it just becomes difficult for me to say, Boston's going to go really ramp up to go try to win this game. If you think that, you should probably be betting Brooklyn immediately. You should probably be betting Portland tomorrow in a game where maybe they're going to try to catch Minnesota off balance if Minnesota plays their starters 36, 38 minutes or some shit. So like, you got to take advantage of it somewhere. I'm inclined to just keep their minutes just about the same.
Yeah, I think in general, there's going to be individual players who will look back on and be like, oh, look, this guy played a bunch of extra minutes because of the NBA Cup. A lot of it's going to be in hindsight after the fact. But I do also think it makes sense to just look at the overall numbers. They're like half a minute more for key rotation players, which isn't going to be like the biggest deal in the world. But I do think that it's probably the correct way to go ahead and approach this. Some more super chats that we've gotten here. One from Chris Williams, who says, if you don't believe that atoning brings good karma, hit the like button early before the show started and had his work comms meeting and won a new iPhone 16 Pro Max and came in first in Sunday Showdown. Look at that. All that Chris got just from liking the video. Who would have thought?
What a time to be alive.
Shout out to Chris Williams, who also
you know what I get from Greg on a daily basis? Absolutely nothing. Nothing from Greg, ever. Nothing.
Like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. That's it. You just like the video, and all of a sudden you get free iPhones, you win GPPs, all that just from liking the YouTube. Takes like 2 seconds to do it. Look at how much Chris has gotten out of it. Thank you very much for the support there, Chris. Let's go into Discord and see what questions we are getting.
We have Ryan Rollins starting,
actually,
so we have to talk about it.
Starting in place of Damian Lillard is Ryan Rollins. So Ryan Rollins, who I believe is the flat man. If he's not, he's close to it.
Yes.
He is, 3K over on DraftKings. What is he on FanDuel? I imagine he's also the flat min over there as well. 3,600. So $100 more. So Ryan Rollins, who we did not have projected to play a massive amount of minutes, only 17 was the projection for him before. But now all of a sudden, Ryan Rollins thrust into the starting lineup, Eric. I have to look up some of the points per minute rates and things like that, because I don't know about you. I didn't put a ton of thought into Ryan Rollins today.
I did, because we had him projected pretty well this morning when I looked at it, and it made sense. I was curious what we were going to do because I recorded before Damian Lillard got ruled out last night, and I was like, oh, I'll deal with it in the morning. And I pulled up our advanced stats page, started piecing together my minutes projections, and I was like, who the shit is Ryan Rollins? He's a fantasy point per minute producer in 58 minutes. That's all the sample size that we have on him. He's on a 2-way contract here. I'm looking at a number of different things about him back in the day because I know he was an absolute max. He was a max stud for Coastal Carolina. It was congratulations. And then he ends up showing up at Toledo in the MAC. Great stuff. But Ryan Rollins, I don't think he'll be a fantasy point per minute guy, especially not playing alongside Giannis as opposed to like cleanup duty. But seems like he's not exactly terrible. And I repeat, he is a flat 3K. So it becomes hard to negate it. Now the question becomes, we have 2 3K pieces on DraftKings. We have Keaton Wallace, we have Ryan Rollins. And it's always nice to have the things that are shored up, but like your slate is really going to depend on how those 2 early pieces do. And then if the news breaks late, you're going to have $3,100 Klingon or Robert Williams that you could potentially have for one of them. There are worlds where you play 3 of those guys and you just go up and get Tatum and Giannis and Luka and whomever else at the top end. But like, it's very, very interesting now for this slate to have like 2 extreme value pieces in the early window and then extreme value pieces that could potentially show up later.
Yeah, Keaton Wallace, somebody else we're going to have to talk about a little bit here because he's another guy who I hadn't thought about Keaton Wallace until all of a sudden, well, you know, we knew that Trae Young was going to be out, so he's obviously somebody who's been on mine throughout the day, but I haven't considered Keaton Wallace on a single slate at all this year. And now all of a sudden, he's somebody who's mega chalk. Here's actually what I think is nice about Ryan Rollins, because he's not going to project as well as Keaton Wallace, but he's going to show up in lineups. This is going to flatten our exposure to Keaton Wallace a little bit, because I was getting Keaton Wallace in 90% of lineups before. He's still going to, in all likelihood, be my most rostered player by a pretty good margin. But now that we have another value option, it's just going to be somebody else who goes into lineups with Keaton Wallace or in place of Keaton Wallace in some of those spots. So the 90+% exposure I had to Keaton Wallace probably comes down to like 75 or 80% now.
Agreed. I mean, the thing about Keaton Wallace is like we will get verification that he is going to be in that starting lineup. I would like to see Atlanta what they're going to be rolling out. I assume we're going to get Garrison Matthews in the starting lineup at the 3 potentially. I think you're going to get Dyson Daniels doing a lot of the ball handling, especially when Keaton Wallace isn't on the floor. It's just basically the lack of bodies they have there. But like There's some stuff from Atlanta I found to be kind of appealing this morning. We'll see if it's still going to be appealing once we get a 3K piece in Rollins baked into our lineups. But there's no doubt that like you're locking up lineups early for $3,200 Keaton Wallace, and you're going to be locking up 3K lineups. And I mean, I want to be overweight to both here, and hopefully we get that news before 8 p.m. Eastern time, 5 p.m. for that Toronto-Milwaukee game, because then I can maybe spread it out a little bit more to some of the later value too.
By the way, I don't think Keaton Wallace even starts, but I don't know how much it's going to matter for a couple of reasons. Number one is this Hawks team is so shorthanded, especially in the backcourt. Like, look at the available guards they have to play. I think Garrison Matthews is going to slot into the starting lineup, but you look at who's available for the Atlanta Hawks as far as guards go. Here's what you got for tonight. You got Dyson Daniels, Garrison Matthews, Keaton Wallace. That's kind of it. That's kind of it. They've got 3 guards that are available today. Mm-hmm. So a couple things that means is even coming off the bench, you would have to get a decent amount of playing time out of Keaton Wallace. And then another thing to add here as well, the likelihood of a blowout is crazy high. We haven't talked about games that were likely blowout situations because, at least off the top of my head, we haven't had a game quite like this season. Boston is a 16-point favorite at home against the Atlanta Hawks. The most likely scenario is that the starters are not going to be playing at the end of the fourth quarter. Keaton Wallace is somebody who's going to be playing garbage time. So I don't even mind if Keaton Wallace doesn't start. I don't think that invalidates him as an option or anything like that. Just kind of forewarning for when we get that starting lineup that's probably going to come out in like 15 minutes if he's not in it. People are going to want to know if they should bail on Keaton Wallace. I'm not expecting him to start.
I'm checking something here over on the NBA advanced stats page. Somebody just said, Daniels can't dribble, Josh Gillum. I'm just curious because I don't think that's true. I feel like I watch a lot of basketball. I saw him dribbling a lot and playing point guard.
Overrated. In the aftermath. Jaylen Brown didn't learn how to dribble until this year. Every time
I was going to say,
his left hand, he would dribble it off his foot, and he was still an all-star.
Yeah, I mean, I know he might be defending me saying that, like, oh, he ends up being the starter or something. Like, I do think that we probably see him come off the bench more than likely. I'm just saying there's a chance he can end up starting. They just put Garrison Matthews in at the 3. I think that's kind of what most people are assuming. I think that's what our projections are assuming. But there's no doubt that there is a lack of ball handlers out there. I mean, David Roddy, he could dribble it off his fat foot. That'll be fun. Yeah, there's not a whole lot of goodness. You could see some point Jalen Johnson. Like, Jalen Johnson can play some ball handling duty. I mean, this is just going to be not good for Atlanta, more than likely. It's hard for me to want to overinvest in anything outside of Keaton Wallace, just purely because of price tags.
By the way, we just had a projections update. If you wouldn't mind throwing that on screen, Jordan, just show people the Milwaukee Bucks now that we have confirmation of that starting lineup. Because what you'll see here is that we now have where is he? Ryan Rollins, who is the flatman on DraftKings. He's projected for 20 fantasy points. Certainly puts him in play as a value option. That's 2 fantasy points behind where we have Keaton Wallace projected. And the ownership not updated quite yet. That'll be coming in soon. And then you got Giannis on the high end without Dame. Really going to be difficult to get away from Giannis. So Giannis is projected for 66 fantasy points. With the amount of players out, it's pretty easy to pay up for him. And then another thing to consider as well, Eric, is with the potential for even more value to open up later on in the night. This is something that you've brought up on numerous shows in the past that hasn't really come up all that much this year. But if Giannis locks at 8 p.m. and we have players who are potentially going to be ruled out after him, you want to actually get an ROI boost positive to Giannis so he shows up in even more lineups. Because if you do get those scenarios where players are ruled out and you have this excess salary, you're going to want to have already had Giannis in those lineups, considering he's projected to be the highest scoring player on the slate by a pretty good amount here with the absence of Damian Lillard and then, of course, Chris Middleton not being there. So Giannis, another player who you're going to want a ton of exposure to.
I'm going to probably have close to 100% Giannis when it's all said and done. He's probably going to be my highest owned player from the early window of games from anything 8 p.m. Eastern time inside of it. I don't see a planet where I don't get a 1.65 fantasy point per minute guy, and that's with Damian Lillard on the floor. I mean, he is just absolutely stupid. His rates over the course of the last year just go to redonkulous places when you start plugging it in here. And the matchup could not be better on the other side, too. You get a terrible defensive Toronto team on the other side of this one, and you get Giannis with Dame off the floor. Only 1.66 fantasy points per minute here in that sample size. But remember, Middleton's out as well. This is just such a ridiculous spot for him to go out and smash souls. And if you're trying to come up with reasons not to get to Giannis, you're probably just looking at playing like Luka in terms of the super ceiling on it. But like it's the same thing I said about Giannis the other slate, and somebody wanted to combat me. Oh, he will not be optimal if he goes for 55 fantasy points. And you know what he did? He was freaking optimal at 55 fantasy point slate or a 4-game slate, whatever that was, last Thursday. It's just like a no-brainer. When you have a guy who's projecting so much better, and it's like you need 75th, 80th percentile range of outcomes for guys like Devin Booker or guys like LaMelo Ball or Jason Tatum to potentially catch a guy who's projected for 66 fantasy points. You just kind of jam that 66 fantasy point guy and kind of live with the result of it.
Yeah. And we've got some more super chats that are in. One of them, I think he's going to come up again. But hey, another big GPP win. Willie Jenkins turned 50 cents into $5,000 on Sunday. Thanks to y'all. Fuck yeah, that's awesome. Shout out to Willie Jenkins. 50 cents into 5K. That's a hell of an ROI. Good job, Willie.
J.R. Burlow loves starting. He's been
lotion
starting.
Time. Who's greasing up them nets? Jordan, you got to put the graphic up on the screen. It's who's the lotion play of the night.
No.
Super, super easy here. You know who's going to put the ball in the bucket?
Giannis a lot.
Yeah. The answer here is Giannis. There we go.
You put the lotion on the skin. The lotion goes on the skin.
I was gonna say, there's no way to know for sure that he's the guy until the graphic comes on screen. But yeah, it's got to be Giannis. He's the best pay up option on the slate by a mile. Stokes also asked that in the Discord. Trying wants to know who is the favorite pay up option as a must have. I'm about to rerun everything once we get an ownership update with Ryan Rollins starting, which I was already getting to a ton of Giannis. He was in 3/4 of my lineups. Now he's probably going to be in like 90% of my lineups. That another value option has opened up. That's going to make it even easier to pay up for Giannis today. Then Sean Jeezy left us a super chat. He says, what sub 1% player wins the $5 mega lottery contest on DraftKings? Boy, I wish I knew the answer to this one. I'm going to do my best to answer it. Well, Derek Lively is going to play today. So that's not something that we're
the answer is probably, the answer is probably somebody that isn't going to end up sub 1%, but could end up being like 5-10%, but is currently sub 1%. Like that would be Robert Williams, or that would be Donovan Clingan. Like those guys are both sub 1%. So that's kind of cheating, but I think those are the right answers right now.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. My answer is going to be Klingon. I think he's the guy who could, it's going to, whoever starts at center for the Blazers.
I'll probably play some of both, to be honest. Like even if it ends up being Robert Williams starting, he's got power forward eligibility, which changes the game a little bit. If they were both center only, yeah, you'd be fucked to try to get both of them and then just say, let's party and I'll give up all the raw points at center, just try to get 30 out of both of them. But because Robert Williams has forward eligibility, I think you can have lineups with both, even if one is starting and the other isn't.
Yeah, the preference is going to be whichever one starts. But another thing, too, that also kind of makes this a little bit irrelevant as a question. Yeah, I'll get to it in a sec. Is with Klingon being $3,100 and Robert Williams also being $3,100, if you had one of them in a lineup, like it's very easy to just flip it to the other one, whichever one ends up starting. So that's the answer that I'll give there. By the way, starting lineup for the Atlanta Hawks, it is Keaton Wallace in the starting unit. So I was wrong. I thought it was going to be Garrison Matthews, Wallace, Daniels, Risa Shea, Jalen Johnson, and Clint Capella. Keaton Wallace was going to look good even if he came off the bench. He's the best value play on the slate.
I mean, this is just so fucking stupid. This slate just got ridiculous. We have a 3,200 and a 3K
Keaton
guy.
Wallace, 100% Giannis Antetokounmpo.
Oh my God. I mean, that's like 3 lineup spots that the entire field is going to bake in. I mean, I would currently be baking them in right now too. I guess the question becomes like, how do we get different? And what do we do to kind of give ourselves paths to win this $5? What do we do to give ourselves paths to winning a mini max, or, these massive 35,000, or in the case of that 90,000 plus entry type spots? I mean, do you just want to say, come chase the raw points there? Or like, I think in cash, you're playing Wallace, you're playing Rollins, you're playing Giannis, and then you're going to have late news and potentially just kind of like backload some type of lineups and set it up for tournaments. I mean, what are the like paths to getting different? Like, I think LaMelo Ball looks a lot more interesting now, purely because like you're going to see so many people who utilize. I mean, they're both point guard only, right? Rollins and Wallace. So like, there's only 3 lineup spots that they can show up at. And if you're going to see as much ownership as we're seeing on some of these other guards like Devin Booker, some of the other spots that I'm kind of like identifying. If you like lock up a lineup early with LaMelo Ball, or some of the ceilings that exist there early from the guard position, especially point guard, like you're just not going to be very duplicated. Like maybe you're duplicated early because people haven't gotten that news yet. It is such an interesting game theory slate. Probably the most interesting game theory slate we've had all year.
If you could only lock one player in, who would you lock in?
Keaton Wallace.
It's Giannis for me.
Oh, that's actually a really good call. Wow. Okay, that is 100% the right answer. I atone for my sins.
All right, there we go. Everybody else, you want to atone for your sins, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. A couple more super chats here. One is from Keys. How do you feel about Jared McCain? You got Paul George, who's still on a minutes restriction, but his playing time is starting to get ramped up a little bit. He played 33 minutes last game. You got Joel Embiid back. That's a pretty thin play. No need on a slate with this much value. Also, McCain's $4,300 on DraftKings. He is $5,000 on FanDuel. There's guys who are cheaper that project much better than him.
Facts.
Kid Stu left a super chat. There's no question there. Let's see if he threw something in. Here we go. Kid Stu said DK tiers 1 through 6 and second favorite each year. Did DK tiers come back? I thought that was dead.
No way. Is it back? I'll pull it up. Bring them out. Bring them out. Bump, 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 ba-dum, bump, ba-dum.
I don't think there is tiers.
There is tiers
there
right
is.
here.
Never mind.
NBA tiers tournament special, and it is going to overlay. Great shout out. Tier 1, Giannis Antetokounmpo, not
Yeah.
close.
All
Tier
right.
2, LaMelo Ball, not close to Cade Cunningham, but although you can make a case for Cade Cunningham, maybe a little bit closer. Tier 3 going to be Karl Anthony Towns for me. Tier 4, that is going
By
to...
the way, that's Devin Booker for me in tier 3.
Tier 3, okay. Karl Anthony Towns for me. Tier 4, it is going to be... Man, this is a tough one. Steph Curry for me as well. I'm just kind of cross-referencing projections. Tier 5, I have Jaylen Brown, but...
Tyler Hero for me.
Okay. And tier 6, I'm looking at John Collins / Lauri Markkanen.
Yep, Lauri Markkanen for me as well in tier 6. So there we go, kids. I did not even realize that tiers is back, which that is going to be to the delight of some people in the audience and the dismay to other people in the audience. The most controversial thing that exists on the show. Of all the things we do, the minute and a half that we occasionally spend answering a question on tiers is really what gets people up in arms above everything else. But kids Stu, yeah, thanks for putting us onto that. And for everybody else, I know some people out there get upset when we talk about the tiers and answer the questions. It looks like it's going to overlay. I'm
playing it right now.
It's like 65% full or something like that with the slate locking in 20 minutes. So yeah, go check that out.
Boo tiers. Do you not like overlay? I apologize for the great shout out that we had from them. I'm going to play some in this. Have to hand
We've got some more questions in the Discord here. We've got Jansen saying, came in quick, round up the late swap news that'll have the biggest impact. Yeah, who is the one player, Eric, who's questionable you think could potentially have the biggest impact on your lineups?
DeAndre.
Yeah, same. Especially because people are just not going to have the flexibility in their lineups to make that swap.
Well, also, if you get Nurkic out, people feel comfortable with Mason Plumlee, and then the news will still potentially not have broken yet, and then that center spot will be eaten up. And if it ends up being Klingon starting, you're getting the absolute stone cold nuts with Klingon in that starting unit against a terribly horrible matchup in Minnesota on the other side. But the minutes, the fantasy point rate, and the opportunity all would gigantically make up for it. Oh, and the ownership that would exist on it would be next to nothing.
We've got a question in here from Sniffs1234. He said, I may have missed this, but do you bump up Plumlee in anticipation for Nurkic being out? So I don't have to bump up Plumlee in any way. I have a lot of exposure to other players from the Suns. We went over, like Devin Booker, Bradley Beal, all these guys, because you've already got Kevin Durant out. So you've made a mistake if you don't have exposure to the Suns right now. So as long as you have some sort of exposure to the Suns right now, you're going to have the flexibility to make late swaps when we do potentially get an update on Yusuf Nurkic. So just make sure you have Suns exposure. Then we've got LLL Crytix. If I pronounced that incorrectly, my bad. He wants to know, is there a way in the Sims tool to put Giannis at the power forward spot more than at center? No, there is not. But he's more likely to show up in the power forward spot than the center spot anyway, just because there's just better center options than power forward in general.
Yeah. Give a boost to Nurkic. Give a boost to Ayton. Give a boost to some of these guys that are in right now, potentially like just late value, and boost them up. And I think naturally you'll get Giannis into the power forward spot a little bit more.
We've got a question from Einstein. He said, with McBride and Campaign potentially out, would you consider giving a boost to Brunson? I'm going to have so much flexibility in my lineups because they're, other than some of the players like Keaton Wallace, who I'm getting to in the first game, the majority of my exposure is naturally as players from the later game anyway. I'm not going to have to boost Brunson to make swaps to him in the event that Miles McBride is out.
Gotcha. Can we get to Nuke of the Night now? We should do it now before we get too close to lock.
One more question to answer, and then we'll do the Nuke of the Night. But we've got Mr. Cool Game wants to know favorite point guard plays for FanDuel single entry. Yeah, Rollins and Keaton Wallace. Easy. That was what I wanted to do that first. Super easy one to answer. Now, the time that all of you, and especially Eric, has been waiting for. Jordan, it's time for Nuke of the Night. Play the animation. Or not.
Or don't. Just be miserable.
Here we go. Last night, the Nuke of the Night. It was not great for either of us.
No, Zubac smashed. He put up like 50.
Didn't matter. You
I know. You had mega ceiling from Victor Wembanyama. That didn't help. Yeah. But Zubac was awesome in the second half. Ty Lue didn't give him the ball in the first half. What an idiot.
Yeah. We picked guys in Sabonis and Zubac who had good games. But if you were paying up, you needed to have Wemby last night. You needed to have SGA. So it's not like they had poor games. It was just other guys ended up being better. It's crazy high scoring slate. Let's get back at it today. Eric, who's the Nuke of the Night?
Carnell Brooks, go to hell. He said Nuke of the Night is MVS. That is not very nice. And I don't need to be hearing that kind of slander here on this show when I'm trying to give you good advice. But here's what we are going to do, friends. Everybody with me now. I know it's a terrible matchup. I know that he's not very popular right now. I understand that this is going to be weird to some of you, but if you followed me long enough in the way in the path, these are the slates that I end up smashing on because I will react to late news and I will have tons of lineup spots, but it is really hard to not pre-bake in Luka Doncic into your lineups right now. We have Giannis Antetokounmpo pulling tons of ownership, and I'm going to lock him into lineups. But in addition, we have a pretty low optimal percentage on Luka Doncic, but that completely changes if we get even more value to show up later. And what you are going to have a very tough time doing is turning in multiple pieces if this news comes after 9 p.m. Eastern Time, 6 p.m. Pacific, after that Utah-Phoenix game locks, to be able to react and get more Luka Doncic in your lineup. So everybody with me now, ROI boost the shit out of Luka Doncic to get more of him because he is at 11K. He's projected for 57 fantasy points right now. There are lots of 60, 65th percentile outcome games that are more than enough for you on this slate. And if it ends up being Robert Williams who starts, you have forward spots where that utility isn't as valuable. If it ends up being Klingon, well, you're probably going to have a tougher time because there are multiple centers, and center is generally a very valuable position. There's an opportunity cost slated to it, but that makes it all the more appealing to get yourself in tournaments to a guy who currently is pulling 11% ownership, who I'm looking around the industry. We have him the highest of pretty much anywhere that I'm looking at right now. I am obsessed with Luka Doncic for tournaments, my Nuke of the Night.
Are you finding it? Because I'm rerunning lineups right now with everything that's gone down and been updated over the course of the last 10 minutes or so. Is it viable with the amount of value we have to get Giannis and Luka lineups together?
Yes, I have tons of Luka and Keaton Wallace. 3,200, Ryan Rollins, 3K, Robert Williams, power forward eligibility, 3,100. If it ends up being a center there, you still have more than enough salary. I just was playing with hand builds here right now as I'm trying to really get my lineup set where it ends up being 6,000 plus in order when you put in Keaton Wallace, Klingon, Ryan Rollins, Doncic, Giannis. Now, if you take Klingon out, it's still over 5,000 per. And you can easily go to Nurkic. You can go to a number of different value pieces in that mid-range where you can kind of build out lineups that way. I find it to be one of those spots where, like, if the news breaks that way, you would want to be way overweight to Luka. And right now, it's difficult, as you said before, but like, if the news breaks that way, you might as well take into account all of the upside. And if you're going to account and have the news break that way, you should have more lineup spots for Luka. Like, it's just a foregone conclusion. His optimal percentage will more than double if you have 3K pieces show up purely because of his projection.
For myself, this is not somebody who's necessarily going unowned or anything like that, but he is somebody I find myself getting overweight to the field to. And I do wonder if maybe his ownership could be a little bit lower than expected just because of a slow start to the year. But there is no Kevin Durant, and Bradley Beal, who has looked like absolute dog shit so far this year. He's going to have to play a bigger role for the Phoenix Suns, especially if Nurkic ends up getting ruled out as well. So you got most of the attention here going to Devin Booker. He's going to be one of the most popular players on the entire slate. We've got him projected for 37% ownership, but we've only got 17% ownership projected to go to Bradley Beal, Eric. And like I said, wouldn't be totally shocked if that ends up coming in a little bit lower than that. I think there's massive opportunity for Bradley Beal. If he's not completely washed, this is a great situation and a great matchup for him against the Utah Jazz.
Jordan Klein is the devil, and I would like to have a new producer on our shows. Can I ask for that?
What did Jordan do now? Other than not play the Nuke of the Night animation on cue? Because that was
the exotic.
Great.
He played the exotic. This guy. We've purposely not done the exotic play of the night for multiple states because nobody wants it because it's a dumb bit and you're a dumb person. I award you no points. So may God have mercy on your soul.
All right. I'm kicking off what I think is going to be my final Sims run, but we'll see. Who knows what kind of news could end up breaking in the next 10 minutes. Let's see. Going back into Discord. Other questions that came in. One here is from S.A. Johnson wants to know top players at each position on FanDuel. Let me rerun my Sims, then I'll get back to you when I have some updated information there. So we'll circle back on that one, S.A. Johnson. M. Grizzly wants to know, would you recommend to increase the percentage payout to first when making lineups for the big $5 contest tonight? No, just enter the payout to first that the contest is, which it's $100,000 to first, $400,000 prize pool off the top of my head, 25% to first. You should always enter in what it actually is to first.
Yes, you should.
JEW wants to know, where would you cap Wallace, Giannis, and Rollins in the 150 max and 20 max? I'm not going to be capping them. I am probably going to have 100% of Giannis. I'll know more shortly here. And then as far as Wallace and Rollins, I'm going to play whatever I get of them. I'm not going to cap it.
I am with you.
I have... All right, so I didn't get to... This is still a lot, but... So I did end up with 100% of Giannis. I have 80% of Keaton Wallace and 50% of Ryan Rollins.
Yep, those are going to be probably the way that I'm probably going to almost be flipping that, I think. I'll probably get a little bit less than 80% of the guy who's locking early here, and hopefully, something will break at some point in time and I can do something with the Rollins. I can also just kind of react to, if Keaton Wallace is having a bad game, I can play more Rollins there at the point guard spot if I want to, and have some flexibility if we're still waiting on that news.
Yeah, and as for other players, I don't really feel like I have problematic ownership on anybody else. So I just did my DraftKings run. I'm going to upload these lineups. Then I know we had the FanDuel question. So going to get back, run lineups for FanDuel, see where that ends up landing. Do you have lineups for DraftKings and FanDuel, or just
only playing DK today?
Yeah. This was a slate where for us doing the show, it was going to be
impossible.
And I know you've done some insane things in the past. I feel like if I've done anything for you as a friend, I think it's talk to you out of not playing multiple slates every single show you do.
My ROI on life, my positive expected value, just not failing to get in CSVs, playing 3 or 4 different sites in a night. I think it's just because, I'm friends with Rinpack, and Rinpack is playing Yahoo and FanDuel and DraftKings, and we're always talking about different slates. And, I think this game's been soft. This has been a soft contest. Oh, nobody's going to be filling up the turbo slate. We've been doing less of that back and forth, and it's been good for both of us. We've been smelling the roses a little bit more in our lives.
And we've got a question here from Maddie T. Maddie wants to know, who's our favorite forward for $5,400 or less on DraftKings? So let me just kick off a FanDuel Sims run, And then I'll go back to my DraftKings on. So FanDuel simming out now. Let's see, 5,400 and below at forward. All right. So if we're just talking like overall, that's going to be Grayson Allen for me. If we're talking about it relative to who should project the best, which is probably the nature of the question, is who does Matty want to roster with $5,400 left there? Let's see, $5,400, and it's forward. So it could be small forward or power forward. That is going to be, oh, you know, I don't hate this. Andrew Wiggins for now. And that'll give you a little bit more flexibility to make swaps later.
Love.
Not really the best pricing area, but part of that too is my lineups are so heavily skewed stars and scrubs that I don't have that much of the mid-range. Like maybe Bradley Beal, if you're considering him mid-range at his price point, he's the closest guy that I'm prioritizing in the mid-range, but I do think this is a pretty good stars and scrub slate, which is a lot of slates end up being good stars and scrub slates. Stokes wants to know, how much Goga should we be concerned about? I don't really understand how much Goga should we be concerned about.
So, I mean, Goga looks great in the tools, and he's somebody that in the Sims is showing up a ton. My biggest issue is the position. And if he weren't center, if we didn't have potential of Plumlee and Klingon and those two specifically in the late night hammer, getting to Nurkic, obviously 5,800. Like if that didn't exist, I'd probably get to more Goga, but I'm kind of playing this straight up. I'm going to probably be a little bit under his 22% ownership we currently have when it's all said and done.
Yeah, I have Goga in, let's see. Yeah, I have Goga. Oh, I've got my FanDuel lineups now that just came across.
Also, I swear to God, if John Collins doesn't start today, I'm going to be upset.
So let's see. What did I end up with on Goga? I've Goga in 23% of lineups. I'm pretty comfortable with that being the number I have on him because I do think he looks really good, but I don't want to have him in like 60% of lineups where it really hampers my ability to make swaps here. So yeah, I'm cool with that. I've got 23% Goga for myself. If there was no players on the injury report, I probably would have Goga in like, I don't know, 30 to 40% of lineups or something like that.
We have like 4 super chats of exotic play of the night. It's Luka Doncic. So I just wanted to let you know, it'd be weird if my nuke of the night, my favorite play of the night, wasn't the exotic play of the night if he fit the criteria, which he does.
And for myself,
Jordan played the video because he just couldn't help
Grayson
himself.
Allen. It's Grayson Allen for me. I don't know if he's in the hype video, but Grayson Allen, easy answer for me. I got Grayson Allen in 28% of my lineups.
Oh baby, look at you. That's a spicy little meatball right there, sir. That's a big number.
Right in line with the field, with what the field has.
Grayson Allen's in the video.
Oh,
man,
nice.
Glory be and the saints be praised. He's in the video. Yay.
Now he can't miss. He's in the video. Other super chats that we have that came in. Rob wants to know for a FanDuel GPP last spot, RJ Barrett or Lauri Markkanen. I prefer Lauri Markkanen. Jordan asking for the exotic play of the night. Riley Shaffrey asking for the exotic play of the night. Over at 14 says, I'm playing Mike Conley at 40% over all the chalk. That is a lot of Mike Conley. I have Mike Conley in 6% of lineups, so I'm not going to tell you he's unplayable because I have 6% of him. There's a cap ceiling on Mike Conley. I think the most minutes he's played all season is 27.
I also am getting a lot more Tatum in this last run with all this point guard value, so I just thought I'd let that be known. But yeah, don't do that with Mike Conley. We're talking no, don't do that.
Yeah, if you have him in a lineup or two, that's okay, but that's an aggressive amount for a guy who is probably playing 25 to 27 minutes. Peter Wasaki, last man in for $8,300 or less for DraftKings. All right. 8,300 or less. Steph Curry. Steph
Sounds
Curry,
good.
right at $8,300. Next question, it is from Sharon. Sharon, we want the exotic play of the night. We gave it to you guys. We gave it to you guys. We came in, we had, yeah, and there we go. We got
Heathens.
exotic right there. Yeah,
great.
We got Luka from Eric. We went myself. I went with Grayson Allen. All right, so my lineups are done. Are you all set with your lineups now?
No, I'm not done. I'm almost there.
Okay, so I'm curious to know which of the players are you getting to the most of as contrarian options for today? Is there anybody who showed up in lineups you weren't expecting? You alluded to Jason Tatum, so maybe he's potentially an answer there.
Yeah, Jason Tatum just showing up more because I have money to spend with some of the stuff that I have done here, with all these things that I've done. Shout out the killers. But John Collins, I brought him up a little bit there a second ago. I mean, you gotta. He's okay if he doesn't start as well, but I would really like to have him starting here. Get this Kyle Filipowski stuff out of here. There's not really a ton of utility for him here on today's slate, so I would very much prefer for that to be the case. Otherwise, contrarian options. I mean, we're talking about number of guys that are just like 1%, 2% right now in those Portland pieces. Is there anybody else that benefits from Portland? Because I think Jeremy Grant and there's like a little bit of a case to be made for getting to some of these other guys. I mean, the rebounding numbers, maybe they do play it a little bit more straight up here without Ayton. Like, I think there's at least some interest to get to something else there from the Portland side of things. And I'm just kind of finishing up
a couple super chats that came in right at the buzzer here. So I want to make sure we could answer them. Salah Abdallah is asking in one FanDuel GPP, Love and Highsmith or Allen and Draymond Green, Allen and Draymond Green. And then Price Production says, seem to be getting more lineups with money left on the table than usual. How much is too much? Most of my lineups are using all or most of the salary. Of my top 150 lineups, I have the most salary left on the table being $300. So Price Production, if you're building lineups that are leaving like thousands of dollars in salary on the table, you've made an error somewhere. I don't know what you mean by a lot of salary left on the table or more than usual. But yeah, my lineups for the most part either use all the salary or leaving 100 on the table. A couple lineups that are leaving 300 on the table, but I don't have anything more than that. Larson 407 says he's getting to a ton of Franz Wagner on FanDuel. Wants to know if there are any good small forward pivots. All right. FanDuel, Franz Wagner.
I do have some David Roddy for what it's worth. I think there's a chance to just blow out and just get to some extra of those dudes. Makes some sense.
I mean, right at $8,200. Not really. I mean, RJ Barrett, somebody who's good to be getting to. Julius Randle isn't all that popular at 7,300, but Wagner still looks like a better option than those guys. Then JW wants to know, did Jalen Johnson get lost on the slate with all the extra value to go higher up? He was never really a guy for me on this slate.
Yeah, I had him in like it's funny, you do like a thing the night before where you just have like a placeholder. I had him in a placeholder because I'm like, oh, Trae Young's out. And then Tatum's in and this game is still a 15-point spread and I just can't do it.
He's very expensive. The other thing to consider is Trae Young being out. Jalen Johnson's kind of already priced for that. I mean, how much more expensive should Jalen Johnson reasonably be? He's $8,600 over on FanDuel. He's, I think, the same price on DraftKings. Double checking though, he is, $8,600 on DraftKings. I have 4% of Jalen Johnson. He's so expensive. It's such a bad matchup as well. There's a lot of blowout risk, which we usually don't take too much into account, but for this particular game, it is going to matter. And we were already at lock. That was a very fast hour. A lot of stuff happened, and there's still more to come as well. So I'm about to go join Josh over on Playback. And you guys should join us there too, because we are still waiting on a ton of news. We still are waiting on Nurkic, Andrew Wiggins, DeAndre Ayton, the Knicks news. So those other players that those are in the later games. They're going to be important. We may or may not get that news during the post-lock show. We're for sure getting Knicks news though. Miles McBride questionable, campaign questionable. If those guys are out, Tom Thibodeau is about to run his dudes into the ground, and Josh and I are going to cover what that means for our lineups if that happens over on Playback. So Jordan, throw the link into the YouTube chat so people know where to join us. And now Josh and I over on Playback, come hang out with us. If you guys didn't do it yet, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. See you over on Playback.